All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is 8:02 and some change in the AM. It is Tuesday, March 23rd, and we are here. Mr. Burgraff and I are here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation boardroom for this day's Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting. So if I may ask if everyone can go ahead and mute themselves unless you have a question. As always, the chat box is live. You may lob in questions there, or Mr. Williams is initiated. He knows that this is a group that tends to unmute themselves and ask questions, and you are invited to do so. So yes, today we have a Mr. Kerry Williams. He's a professional engineer. Has been, I believe, he's been a long-time advocate for use of pumped hydro for energy storage. And he's here to give us a briefing on that concept. I don't want to steal his thunder, but I will simply note that this is not a new concept. It just maybe is a little bit new to our state and our milieu. But Mr. Williams, if I may go ahead and hand over, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jomo. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Jomo for inviting me to present here this morning and all of you for joining us. A little about my background first. I'm Kerry Williams. My family moved to Alaska before statehood. I started first grade in Palmer and graduated from Palmer High. They discovered oil and crude oil while I was in high school. Then during my college years, I worked on heavy construction jobs during summer breaks to pay for college. Those projects included the Chena Flood Control Project and highway construction on the Steese, the Richardson, and the Parks highways around Fairbanks. Immediately after college, the pipeline started, so then I worked on that from Valdez to Prudhoe for the duration. Then life happened and I remained mostly in the construction industry until I retired about 20 years ago. In that time, I held every position from laborer to superintendent, but mostly worked as an engineer of one sort or another. When I retired, I realized that energy costs would eventually consume too much of my retirement income, and I started looking for ways to lower our energy costs. That quest for economical energy is what brings me here today. Okay. What is pumped hydro? It's simply a very large rechargeable battery. Or to be more accurate, it's a grid scale combination surge arrestor and uninterruptible power supply. For us, it will be an uninterruptible power supply that would last weeks instead of just hours. As the animation shows, when excess energy is produced, water is pumped uphill into a reservoir. When extra energy is needed, the pump reverses and puts that energy back into the grid. It's a technology that's been around for a century. It's the most mature storage technology that we have, and it already accounts for 95% of all grid storage in the world. It's long been tested in subarctic environments in Norway and Iceland. For cheap renewable energy, we need to convert intermittent power supplies into firm base load power. We now know the way to do that without fossil fuel backup is with long-term energy storage. But how long? Most grid scale storage is just used for daily load balancing as shown in this animation. Essentially, that short-term storage acts as a surge protector for the grid. Those systems usually have only 8 or 10 hours of storage, not enough for us. In Norway, the average pump storage capacity is about 90 days. They use it for seasonal energy storage, pumping meltwater uphill into lakes to trickle out base load energy through the winter. But 90 days would be overly expensive. So how long is long enough? Researchers at MIT and Harvard found a way to estimate the minimum hours of storage that would be needed to turn the proper balance of intermittent power into fully reliable firm renewable energy. The links to their paper is at the bottom, highlighted in yellow. Using and building on their work, we find that our islanded grids need about 2 weeks of energy storage to turn wind and solar into firm and reliable baseload power. With just a few days of storage, Texas utilities would have brushed off their recent ice storm. The cost of pumped hydro storage is very sensitive to storage duration. The longer the storage, the cheaper it gets. Short-term grid scale storage costs anywhere from $200 to $300 per kilowatt hour of storage. Seasonal storage in Norway was 90 days, but it only costs about $1 per kilowatt hour for storage. Our baseload firm renewable energy systems would need around 14 days, and on average that would cost around $10 per kilowatt hour, but sometimes it does get down to $1 per kilowatt hour depending on what reservoirs are available. A little over a year ago, at Governor Dunleavy's request, several associates and I wrote a white paper to compare the proposed Watana Dam project with the Klutna pumped hydro and wind. In it, we also considered pumped hydro prospects at Wright Mountain and Eureka Dome. One of the more interesting things we found was that it would cost more to reach 50% renewable energy with fossil fuel backup than it would cost to go straight to 100% with pumped hydro storage. Long-term pumped hydro storage is extremely economical compared to any other grid scale battery. It costs the same as conventional hydropower to operate because it's made of all the same components. Now that hydro and wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy generation available, it stands to reason that balancing them together can be far more economical than most other kinds of energy. In this map, the squiggly black lines depict the rail belt grid and the red lines depict new transmission that would be needed for certain prospects. The little wind turbines represent existing and prospective wind locations. This chart shows a number of the dozens of mostly off-grid prospects our team is presently working on for the Denali Commission, plus a number of rail belt grid prospects at the big green dots. We've been investigating dozens of prospective systems across the state since the white paper, and we consistently find that 100% renewable energy is cheaper to attain than just 50%. We can't baby step our way to ending our dependency on fossil fuel. We especially can't do it here in Alaska, where even natural gas is several times more expensive than it is outside. The pins in the map show locations of sites we've been investigating for the Denali Commission, plus the rail belt sites that we're more interested in here today. Golden Valley currently supplies an average of about 141 megawatts. Going all electric with heating and electric vehicles will double or triple that. We need about 14 days of energy storage to firm up all the intermittent power generation needed. So Golden Valley will eventually need between 100 gigawatt hours and 150 gigawatt hours of storage. None of the Golden Valley prospects shown here could easily store 150 gigawatt hours by itself, but together, no problem. Splitting the storage into widely spread out sites like this reduces transmission costs, and their smaller sizes increases the probability that local Alaskan construction firms would be building them. Being raised in Alaska and coming from a career in the heavy construction field myself, local labor is important to me. Most of the sites shown are also in or near particularly good wind areas. In this image, great wind potential is golden. Siting storage near intermittent energy sources reduces the cost of transmission and transmission losses considerably. Here we show a number of Golden Valley prospective pumped hydro locations plus associated wind. Now let's take a look at several of those prospects. Any questions so far? No?
Yes, any
Okay.
questions so far? I guess my only question to start would simply be that, again, right now it's focused on wind utilization. Actually, Clark, I saw you pulled yourself off mute, but yeah, so I see it's based on wind utilization. But has there been any looking at possible addition of solar?
We actually do, yes. It needs, the wind and solar need to be balanced together. Wind really dies off during late summer, while solar is still good. So to get 100, to keep 100%, you need a balance of both. And that's what the MIT and Harvard researchers found too. By getting everything balanced correctly, then everything's cheaper.
Mr. Clark, I see that you're off mute.
Yeah, I was going to ask and then thought it's almost surely going to be brought up by Mr. Williams as he, moves through this. I was wondering what those transmission lines, what kind of level that is to try to minimize losses or optimize, for the power that would be carried. But I think he's likely to do that in about 3 slides away. So anyway, that was why I was interested in having that thought.
Okay, then we can go ahead and wait, Mr. Williams, if it's further along the presentation. But I do see that 907-982-2631 has taken themselves off mute. If you'd like to ask your question. Okay, then I'll simply mute you. All right, Mr. Williams, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay. This site, Healy, might be the most cost-effective prospect for Golden Valley. It's only 2 miles from an existing transmission substation, highly accessible by rail or road, has an existing energy workforce, and enough equipment to build it is already in Healy. It would store and balance all the existing and proposed wind at Eva Creek, plus enough more wind to replace or bolster the Healy power plant with 70 megawatts of firm renewable energy that would be every bit as reliable as the existing coal plant. The new administration in Washington is already reviewing the cost of carbon, so this new source of baseload energy might soon be more economical than even coal, even in Healy. The Healy prospect could store 23.5 gigawatt hours or more. It would employ the existing workforce. Typically, renewable energy requires several times the workforce per megawatt hour than fossil fuel energy. So Healy might even need to grow to accommodate an expanded workforce. Here's a satellite view. Those reservoirs would normally remain mostly full, so we could expect that 2 large new lakes just outside Denali Park boundary could also become a fishing and sports destination for park visitors. Prospect at Donnelly could easily supply another 70 megawatts to meet half of GVA's current demand. It could take in and firm up all of Delta Wind's current production, plus all the wind ever proposed for that site, plus much, much more. It's also very near high capacity wind, just a couple of miles south, and there is a new transmission planned to go through that. I think they call it the road belt. So transmission wouldn't be a problem either. In the satellite view, we can see the Richardson Highway squeeze between the Delta River and the lower reservoir. Pipeline is just to the right of that reservoir. Land ownership here is complicated. Both reservoirs and the pumps are on state land, and the penstocks would cross BLM land and the pipeline. But the lower reservoir would inundate 6 lots of the Donnelly subdivision entirely, that dark space on this slide. It inundate 3 others mostly and turn 12 lots into more valuable waterfront lots. A smaller reservoir would avoid that, but we haven't investigated how small is large enough for this site yet. The third project here.
Actually, Mr. Williams,
Oh,
Mr.
yeah.
Williams, back to the last slide, please. What's the distance between those two reservoirs?
I think it's, I'd have to look again, but I think it's about 12,000 feet.
Oh, okay, just for a sense of scale.
Yeah,
you.
each of those two reservoirs takes up almost a square mile.
But not massive by any stretch.
I'll show a good comparison a little bit later, so.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, this third prospect at Canada has great wind, the most in central Alaska, and more storage prospects than I show here. The lower reservoir I expect would be the Yukon or Tanana River. So building here would be an open loop system requiring a more extensive permitting process. But there is easily enough wind to supply GVA's entire expected new demand from electric heat and EVs, and to help supply Anchorage besides. Both the wind and pumped hydro storage would be on Tanana Chiefs Conference land here. The Department of Energy Office of Indian Energy is looking for recommendations right now for pumped hydro and wind site selections on native lands. They have billions to invest and are actively looking for selections that can be shovel ready the soonest. And they've been in contact with us frequently, and they are trying to give away those billions of dollars. So this is a real opportunity. This could be one of those sites if Tanana Chiefs would be interested in supplying rail belt energy as an independent power producer. Eureka is one of the prospects mentioned in the governor's white paper, also I sized it for 70 megawatts of wind and 23.5 gigawatt hours of storage capacity for this presentation. So this plus the other three sites I showed would provide about twice as much firm energy as Golden Valley uses right now. When electricity becomes cheap, then we can expect that people will convert to electric heat and Golden Valley demand will double. Here's the comparison. In the lower left of this chart, I put the 4 prospects I discussed, plus a blue rectangle representing the wind area needed to supply all 4 storage projects. The wind area I show includes the pads, roads, and transmission required for wind turbines. Those together those 4 prospects plus the wind would equal Watana's output, but would only cost 3/4 as much as Watana. And obviously would have a much smaller footprint. Again, the blue dots on the left would give the same amount of power as Watana Dam with a far lower footprint.
So just so we're clear, you're saying that the graphics in the lower, that this is all to scale. The graphics in the lower left to the Watana Lake are to scale.
Yes. Yeah, we put a similar chart in the white paper that compared the Eklutna to Watana, and it's even smaller compared to Watana. The Alaska Energy.
Sorry, please go on.
Okay, the Alaska Energy Agency estimated that Watana would cost $5.12 billion to build and would generate about 300 megawatts of firm energy on average. 300 megawatts of Golden Valley firm renewable energy could be built for around $4 billion, about $1 billion less. For Golden Valley pumped hydro and wind cost estimates, I'm taking current national average costs for the major components and multiplying by 150 to 200% for Fairbanks, and then adding another 42% for engineering and permitting. So that's my very high level cost estimates, but that's what we're seeing. Since all of the prospective sites for wind and energy storage are readily accessible by road or river, I think this should be a reasonable or a high level cost estimate.
Mr. Williams, I see that Miss Meadow Bailey has taken herself off of mute. Miss Bailey, do you have a question?
Nope, I'm just took myself off mute inadvertently.
Oh, okay. All right, then thank you. Please proceed, Mr. Williams.
Okay. Wauntana would cost, here I show a comparison where Wauntana would cost about 5.12 billion, which worked out to about $17 per watt of capacity. And it would take 7 years to build. Fairbanks firm renewable energy would only cost $13 per watt and should only take about 3 years to build. That's after all the permits have been issued, of course, for everything. Average US hydro costs are $1.05 to $7.55 per watt, and Bradley Lake is just barely above the high on average US hydro, probably because of transmission. The new scale that was once proposed would be about $10 per watt, but it's at least 10 years away, and the cost will probably go up on that again. So that's how nuclear would compare. Geothermal is normally $1.87 to $5.05 per watt on the average. But of course, there's not very much of that available in Fairbanks or Alaska for that matter. The link to those costs are shown below and highlighted in yellow again.
We do have a question regarding transmission, Mr. Williams. Does your cost include the transmission lines?
They do, except I don't in, well, let me go back. I don't for Tanana, and that would definitely drive the cost up quite a bit there. For Donnelly, again, there's going to be a line going through it. For Healy, of course, everything's right there already since they have 2 big power plants already. In closing, I'd like to emphasize how much money is looking for economical 100% renewable energy right now. As I mentioned on the last slide, the Department of Energy already has billions of dollars earmarked for this type of project. We can expect far more with this new administration. There's also hundreds of billions in private money looking for renewable energy worldwide. Whether we believe in the need to go carbon free or not, most of the world does, and corporations worldwide are racing to do so. Let's take advantage of that market. We can provide 100% renewable energy in quantities large enough to attract the industries that could replace our extraction economy. These are the pipelines that could drive Alaska's future. Thank you for listening. Now, anyone else have any other questions?
Yes, we've actually finished quite a bit early as far as the presentation slides. So yes, I'd like to go ahead and open it up. I see that Chancellor Rogers has taken himself off mute. Brian, do you have a question?
Yes, I've seen a proposal that was made for using the Fort Knox mine site after mine closure. So we're some years away from that. Just wondering if you had looked at that as a possibility for impoundment.
I just heard about that possibility. Whoops. Oh, I thought I had it on this map. I don't. I just heard about that possibility recently and I just barely took a look at it, but it does look like it's a viable location. But of course, we'd have to wait till they get all the gold out of it first.
And then I see we have a Mr. Bruce Jaffa who's taken himself off mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I have a couple questions. I have multiple speakers. I'm gonna have to bail out.
Oh, okay. Well, work out your connectivity issue, sir. You can go ahead and circle back around. My question regards the climate. And again, how do we have year-long usability again in our subarctic climate where again we're using hydrologic storage and things get pretty cold here?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, most of the pumped hydro in the world is in Norway, the Alps, Iceland, and other northern climates. And hydropower in general doesn't care if there's ice on top of the lake. The water runs underneath it just fine. For a lot of our systems, especially the smaller systems off the rail belt, we would need to insulate the penstock. And I'm presuming, expecting that those penstocks will be on the surface rather than buried for the most part. So they do need to be put in boxes, insulated, and kept warm to at least 35 degrees. My initial estimates show that that would not cost too much extra, so I'm comfortable with that.
I see Rich has taken themselves off mute. I have a question, sir.
Yeah, I'm glad somebody asked the question about the winter performance and the winter problems. One of the things that I was wondering about is material. I mean, I presume that all of these are earthen dams that you're using for impoundment. Is that true?
Yes, I'm using those exclusively because everything's so far out in the bush and everything that it just makes more sense. Plus, we're very rarely, everything in the bush is small dams, so it doesn't matter. And even the ones on the rail belt, for the most part, we're holding the dams around 300 feet at the most. So earth bank definitely makes sense, and we calculate that I'm using about $11 per yard for the earth, which is probably about twice as much as it would normally cost. But that's simply so that I can, well, anyway, that's what we're using our estimates for the moment. Again, these are just very high level estimates. Everything would have to be going through engineers to get everything nailed down to the nuts and bolts and actual costs of everything.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little worried about the Tanana extension there. That looks like it's at least 100 miles of new infrastructure, all the new infrastructure, plus all the roads that you'd need to build that infrastructure and access, plus getting wind power to those sites just with big, large windmills. That's a huge undertaking. And I wondered if you've scaled these in terms of what if you couldn't feasibly build them economically, and what stays, what doesn't stay. Is there a prioritization in any of this?
For Tanana, that's right on both the Nenana River and the Yukon. So I would presume that barges would reach those very easily. There's also a one-lane road that goes there right now, but obviously that wouldn't be good enough to haul in wind turbines and all the equipment we need. to build there. And yes, it is the most expensive. But I'm putting it there because of the wind primarily. There's wind stretches north from there quite a bit, very, very high quality wind. This is the gold is generally 40, 50 to 60% capacity factor wind. So that's why. Also, there's quite a few different locations. Oh, I do have the Fort Knox one on this map. And for those that are not economical, we just go to another one. And eventually, we probably would need to get to Tanana, so it might end up being one of the later ones to be built, but eventually I would expect it to be built.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat box. Actually, I will say, before we get off of that, Rich, yeah, of course, again, that would be a lift as far as the transmission, but there are several locations. The reason I hopped up to go look at the big state map is just to kind of see what population centers are in the area that might also benefit from having this kind of hopefully reasonably priced power. Manly is out there. I want to say Minto. It's too bad that former Mayor Isaacson isn't online. He'd probably speak to that. Follow up, Rich?
No, but those are pretty small population centers. That's fine, but I don't think they'd make the case. But you know,
most places won't grow with crushing cost of energy, sir.
You know, it's all an infrastructure cost. I think.
Yeah, I'm only living with a well again, like since November.
Yeah. Let's see. We do have a question in the chat box if you all who have come off mute don't mind. So two questions. Funding from whom? Again, about $4 billion for the all-in cost. And I think that kind of touches on what Rich was asking. Again, there's both scalability, but there's also incremental development. Do we have any thoughts as far as where we might acquire the $4 billion, or are we presuming that this would be on the ratepayer?
The $4 billion would be for about twice as much energy as Golden Valley currently generates. So $2 billion would get all of Fairbanks power. $1 billion would build just about any one of these sites, including wind, to provide about half of Fairbanks power. All of them are scalable. They can be larger or smaller, and you could build the full-scale dams, and then just put in part of the power, part of the penstocks and the generators, and that would save a huge amount of money in every case, and then just add them as you needed the extra power. For the little population centers off the rail belt, most of them, it would actually be cheaper. In fact, the one Rampart, this would actually have a cheaper option, building a pumped hydro site right here rather than running a line from Eureka. Transmission is that expensive.
Okay, I see. I'm going to go ahead and try back to 1-907-982-2631.
Yeah, I just had a question. All these projects seem to depend basically on grant money. And is there any private interest in building any of these?
I didn't hear that. Sorry.
Is there private interest in building any of these as opposed to state or grant funds?
There is private interest, and this would be where independent power producers would come in and big corporations. There's a real need for cheap power for server farms. They also need cooler climates to keep things cool. And this power would be cheap enough that it would really attract them. And in fact, that's one of Iceland's main industries is server farms and aluminum plants running off of their cheap renewable energy. So yes, and there are some private interests that are communicating with us and looking at watching everything we're doing pretty closely, actually.
Okay.
So think independent power producers.
Okay, Mr. Music.
Thank you, Jomo. I've enjoyed your presentation, Mr. Williams. Have you made a pitch to the U.S. Army at Fort Wainwright? They're facing the prospect of building a new power plant. I expect they'll be putting a few $100 million into that. I see now is the time when we have a president who is supporting clean energy to encourage him to put his money where his mouth is. And this could be the first step in the interior to go to zero carbon energy. And I really think that we should take the federal government up on that stated ambition to go clean, that is clean energy. Have you talked to Fort Wainwright, Eielson, Greeley? Most of them are burning coal or some other form of fossil fuel. So I think it's a good time to make that pitch.
We did make a comment on the Fort Wainwright proposal. I haven't heard that back from them yet, but the Department of Defense is looking for renewable energy as much as they can already. So we think that's viable. Altogether, looking around Alaska, there's probably 8 or 10 different bases and locations, DOD locations that could use this, and even a couple where it would be right on the base. The one at Donnelly is only about a mile off base, I believe Wainwright right now. So yes, I think the DOD will be very, very interested when they get around to it. Also, Golden Valley is looking for proposals for, I think, 30 megawatts of storage and renewable energy right now. So the combination of Golden Valley and the fort would be just right for building any one of these. Donnelly especially because it's so close to the bases.
We do have a couple of questions just trying to confirm that the cost estimates are inclusive enough. Do the figures used for the cost comparison include operational costs of pumping the water up and into the storage facility? Essentially confirming the round trip costs for the power.
Yes, we are definitely considering that. It's the pumped hydro site. It does double the cost of hydro energy by pumping it up and then letting it come back down. It's approximately double, but that would, but the pumped hydro sites would also only take in about half of the energy or less of the wind that would be coming in. So altogether, it would add that increment to the wind. I believe that the delta wind, if it was expanded large enough to handle all the wind, all the capacity at Donnelly, would end up costing somewhere around $7 per, 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And so the hydro would add another 2 cents to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're looking at probably 9 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour from Donnelly if that was used. And I believe that fuel for Golden Valley averages something like 13 cents per kilowatt hour. So it would be profitable right off the bat.
We do have a couple of questions. If you don't mind, Director Florence, Seal Smith had taken themselves off mute first, but then I will take you next. So Mr. Smith?
Yes, hi. I'm
Miss
one of the
Smith.
team members for the Pumped Hydro project. And I just wanted to add to the question regarding the Army sites. We did file a comment, and specifically we requested that the Army do a supplemental EIS to look at new information that we submitted regarding alternatives to their proposal. So that just wanted to add that.
Okay, well, since we keep talking about the military bases, we do have a bit of an expert. So Mr. Florence, please.
Thanks, Jomo. So I just wanted to respond to the question and the comment about power supply for Fort Wainwright. So the current environmental impact statement that was drafted and comments have been submitted, I think it's worth noting that that was based on a study completed in 2015, done by a contractor for the U.S. Army, which looked at over a dozen different energy alternatives to supply Fort Wainwright, one of which was renewable energy. So renewable plus some kind of fossil fuel-based firming. But that alternative was not one of the ones that was selected for further study. So they did look at it, but decided not to include it. And it was not one of the 3 alternatives selected to study in the environmental impact statement that came out last year. Now, so I think Seal has a good point, and that is pumped storage as a firming element to renewables was not considered in the U.S. Army's initial evaluation of renewables. So it's an interesting question if they would take that as something to go back and do a supplemental. I wouldn't speculate on that, but we'll see what the Army does with the comments that they received. Thanks.
I do see we have a question in the chat box. If you don't mind, Rich, we'll jump on that and then we'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So is Clute an example of the viability of this concept for Alaska? And of course, Bradley Lake with its recent enhancements?
I didn't quite catch that.
Is Clute an example of viability for this concept for Alaska?
Absolutely. Clute would actually be one of the very best sites. It would be a very economical site. The native village of Clute is very interested in that. It would restore salmon to Clute Lake that were previously blocked by other hydro projects. It would restore the Eklutna Lake to its normal level so that the salmon could get in and out of the lake. And altogether, yes, it would be a very viable site, and I believe it would be the main site in Alaska, especially for the rail belt.
This is slightly off subject, but you just did mention salmon. Are these the kind of lakes, could they be stocked? Say it was a closed loose system, could it be stocked, and would having the fish there impact its power use for power generation?
No, I would expect those lakes to be stocked with the closed loop system, because they are nice lakes. They would all remain within just a foot or two of their top level for most of the time. They'd be doing daily 8 hours worth of energy storage, but yeah, they'd be excellent. They would not, it would not hurt power generation, but of course, any salmon that goes through the pump would probably not be very happy afterwards.
I did mean for some of the closed loop lakes. I know my friends they kind of glaze over when I talk power economics, but they're always up for fishing. Rich.
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, I am really glad that this very large and overarching kind of study was done and presented just on its feasibility alone. It's about time. I looked at this whole question of could Alaska go renewable and what was available geographically and locally 30 years ago. And it was feasible, but I didn't have the data like the wind in Tanana and these feasible storage sites and the idea of storage with hydro. And I just think this is enormously important. There's a lot of unanswered questions, but the questions that are asked, the questions that are posed, the potentials that are assigned, this is incredibly encouraging to me to see these ideas put forward. And some of the numbers have to be preliminary because you don't know until you start digging what you're going to find. But I just think this is a remarkably good idea, and I'm glad you finally brought this to us because I saw the Eklutna work in the Anchorage papers a while back, and this looks very interesting to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Just probably only 3 or 4 years ago, if someone had asked me if Fairbanks could go to renewable energy, I would have said no. There's just plain not enough. There's no way to store it, everything else. But once I started looking and realizing, and our whole team started working on everything, then it became obvious that yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I wish I'd known about pumped hydro long ago, or all of us for that matter, and we'd already be there.
Question in the chat box. Have you been working with AEA to evaluate the economics and operational issues, if any, or are you planning to?
During the governor's white paper, we had phone conferences with the governor and the director first there. And at our second conference call, the governor asked the director if he could do a feasibility study on Eklutna, and he said yes. And since then, as far as I can tell, it's been dropped. And I know he's pushing Wakana real hard. So I don't know what the situation is there. I did not think that they would have the capacity to do a good feasibility study on these, and that might be the problem, that he just overestimated their capacity. So I don't know about AEA right now.
What I know is a lot can be done with unlimited money.
Yeah.
And that's just something we don't have. All right, well, I've actually gone through all the questions that I can see regarding the chat box. Oh, I guess I do have one. So again, so much of this, as far as the economics, is this versus that. Another medium by which we could try to do energy storage with, say, wind farms is things like lithium batteries. So do we have enough data to be able to do that kind of cost comparison vis-a-vis alternate means of energy storage?
Yes, lithium batteries cost somewhere between, well, if they cost more than $200 per megawatt hour of storage, we're typically getting it down to estimating it would be around $10 or less per megawatt or per kilowatt hour of storage. And sometimes we're hitting $1.50 per kilowatt hour. A study came out a while ago looking at how much it would cost to do long-term storage, to long-term enough to make it firm energy. And the result was that it would have to be at least $20 per kilowatt hour or lower in order to make that seasonal storage. And there is no other type of storage I know of that can get this low. And the longer the storage, the cheaper it gets, because the power components are way more expensive than the storage components on pumped hydro. And other storage systems are more equal or even the opposite. So yeah, lithium will never get below $60 per kilowatt hour, just because of the cost of the material. So that's the absolute lowest limit for that. It could be viable for Alaska just because our cost of fuel is 3 times as high as anywhere else. So that would bring it up to the 60, but that's still, you know, that's ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, as I said on the plating board a couple of times, better than bad ain't necessarily good. All right, well, we are nearing the top of the hour. We have, at least by my clock, we got about 5 minutes left. I would like to open up if there are any further questions from the assemblage. I'm surprised. Well, all right. Well, we don't have to drag it to the very end of the hour. Mr. Williams, I do want to thank you for your presentation. I personally find this very intriguing. Again, I know this is not something new. It's looking relatively new to Alaska, but then again, there are a whole lot of things that when you look around the world, they've been done for a long time in other places. We just haven't gotten there yet. Ooh, wow. Does anyone remember how many gigawatt hours of storage are available from Susitna? It's substantial, is it not? Oh, well. We can circle back around on that. Yes, so we do have a question regarding the presentation's availability. Mr. Williams and I are going to work to be able to get a hold of that. So if you'll follow back up with me later, I should be able to get that and get it out to you. And again, Mr. Williams, I really appreciate this presentation. It's interesting, and I certainly believe this is a concept that should inform like the rail belt reliability entity that's supposed to be doing kind of an overarching look at how we're going to generate power across the rail belt. and that this is the kind of concept that again should inform those future discussions. It may not be something that we can slap on to existing projects, but certainly as we consider new wind, new solar, a kind of pairing with green energy storage, I think is something we should consider. And with no one taking themselves off mute to protest, I guess we'll leave it at that. So, sir, thank you very much. Okay, so everybody, Mr. Williams, if you don't mind handing me back control.
Okay, thank you, Jomo, and I hope you're back, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right. But again, I will work to get this presentation if anybody would like to have it. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
I'll send a copy of the slideshow to you, so you can share it if you'd like. And anyway, thank you all very much, and hope I answered most of your questions.
We'll be keeping our eye a little closer look on the Eklutna project as it advances. All right, well, everybody, a little heads up for next week. So we do have our presentation lined up. It's going to be a little off of our usual subject, but we're going to have Mr. John Bittner. He's the head of the Alaska Small Business Development Center. Is in the know and keeps in the know regarding funding that is coming down from different sources, COVID, CARES, and impact funding to help our business sector and our citizenry. So I have asked him if he wouldn't mind giving us a presentation regarding this latest run of federal stimulus. And so he'll be doing that for us next week. So again, Mr. Williams, thank you so much, and your team. Thank you for your good work. And for the rest of the group, please know that, again, we will be getting a presentation, an update presentation regarding the latest federal CARES package from Mr. John Bittner and possibly team next week. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you.